The galactic arena loomed large, its structure massive and intimidating, crafted from dark metal that seemed to drink in the light from distant stars. Crowds packed the stands, beings from every corner of the galaxy jostling for space, eager to witness yet another brutal spectacle. Fights in the arena weren't just for survival. They were displays of dominance, power, and raw strength. Combatants entered, knowing they'd either gain respect or lose everything, often their lives. In the center of it all was the arena's undefeated champion. He was a hulking figure, massive even by alien standards, with scales hardened like armor and muscles rippling beneath. His fists alone could shatter stone, and his roar echoed through the arena like a primal warning. Each fight left the arena floor soaked with evidence of his brutal style, a clear reminder of what awaited any challenger foolish enough to face him. Victory after victory had bolstered his confidence and arrogance. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a symbol, a living legend. Today, as he strode into the arena, the crowd erupted in chants of his name. He paused, looking around at the sea of faces, a smirk stretching across his sharp, tooth-lined mouth. He basked in their adoration, lifting his fists in a show of absolute dominance. He had fought hundreds, maybe thousands, and none had come close to matching him. With each victory, he had grown bolder, crueler, and more dismissive of those who dared to challenge him. His eyes scanned the crowd, and his grin widened. He knew his reputation inspired fear, but he also enjoyed the thrill of humiliating new opponents. He loved watching their faces twist from confidence to terror, as they realized their strength meant nothing here, not against him. Mocking them became part of his ritual, his way of asserting that no one, no matter how skilled or brave, could stand against him. Whispers began circulating around the arena. A new challenger was rumored to be waiting, someone from a distant corner of the galaxy, a species known more for exploration and diplomacy than fighting. The champion chuckled as he overheard snippets about the newcomer. It was amusing, laughable even, that such a creature would think to face him. He turned to one of the arena attendants, gesturing for him to bring in this so-called challenger. The sooner he could dispose of them, the sooner he'd add another victory to his name. As the gates on the far side of the arena creaked open, a hush fell over the crowd. The air grew tense, anticipation crackling like an electric charge. Out stepped a figure that seemed almost insignificant against the towering bulk of the champion. It was a human, dressed in simple gear, no visible armor or weaponry. Just a pair of steady eyes that surveyed the arena with calm, assessing the space around him, the position of his opponent, the distance between them. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. The champion himself snorted, unable to hide his amusement. A human? Had the arena coordinators lost their minds? Sending a creature like this to face him was almost an insult. He leaned forward, pointing a clawed finger at the human and laughing openly, his voice booming. Is this all they could find? A human? I'll be done with you before the crowd settles back down. The human didn't flinch. He met the champion's gaze with a calm, unshaken expression. There was no bravado in his stance, no unnecessary movement, just a quiet readiness. He didn't speak, didn't react to the taunts echoing around him. His focus remained fixed, steady as a rock amid the storm of jeers and laughter. The champion felt a flash of irritation. The human's lack of response, his silence, felt almost like a refusal to acknowledge the threat before him. It was as though he were analyzing, waiting, studying the champion's every move, every word, and every gesture. It was unnerving in a way that surprised even the champion himself. He brushed it off, attributing it to the absurdity of the situation. This was just a human, after all, a weak, soft creature from a small, insignificant planet. The fight would be over in minutes, if not seconds. Yet, as the human continued to stand there, unwavering, a flicker of doubt whispered in the back of the champion's mind. The human's stance was solid, balanced, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The champion pushed the thought away, refusing to entertain it. This was his arena, his territory. Here, his strength was unmatched, his power absolute. The crowd's laughter began to fade, the initial amusement giving way to a tense curiosity. The human hadn't said a word, hadn't even shifted his stance. He simply stood, calm and composed, his gaze fixed on the champion, as if waiting for something. The champion's smirk faded slightly, irritation sparking within him. He was used to fear, to panic, to challengers who couldn't hide their dread. But this human, with his steady gaze and silent focus, was different. With a snarl, the champion decided he would make this quick, put an end to the charade. He raised his fists, muscles coiling, ready to crush this human and prove once again why he was the arena's undefeated champion. Yet, somewhere deep inside, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that this fight might not go exactly as he expected. The human stepped forward into the arena's bright, harsh lights, every eye in the audience turning toward him. He appeared small, almost unremarkable, without the towering height or fierce alien features of previous challengers. Dressed simply, he carried no weapon, no armor to shield him. The alien crowd burst into laughter, mocking his size and lack of imposing features. They couldn't believe a human, a creature often dismissed as weak, would willingly step into a place where the only rule was survival, against the champion known for his ruthless strength. The champion's smug grin grew wider. He looked down on his opponent, certain of his victory. He flexed his massive arms, deliberately exaggerating his size and power, relishing the crowd's reaction as they cheered for him. To the champion, this fight would be nothing more than a formality, a quick, easy win. His confidence bordered on boredom. He couldn't believe he'd even have to waste time on someone so unimpressive. He leaned toward the human and laughed, mocking his opponent openly, taunting him with insults. "They send a human to face me? You must be lost," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. The human's face remained calm, his expression unchanging. He didn't respond, didn't show any sign of fear or intimidation. The champion's insults bounced off him as if they held no weight. He stood there, composed, focused, studying his opponent with a gaze that seemed oddly calculating. While the champion basked in the crowd's approval, the human seemed unaffected by the noise, by the overwhelming spectacle around him. He was here for one purpose, and the roaring audience faded into the background, unimportant to him. This quiet focus began to chip away at the champion's confidence. He was accustomed to challengers reacting to his size and taunts with visible fear, trembling or backing away. But this human didn't flinch, didn't react, and that unsettled him. He brushed it off, though, chalking it up to foolish bravery. Surely, the human didn't understand what he was up against. He couldn't possibly know the power he was about to face. This was a death wish, nothing more. The champion's arrogance flared. He couldn't wait to make an example out of this newcomer, to show him just how insignificant humans were in the galactic hierarchy. The human took a deep breath, standing rooted to the ground, his posture balanced and grounded. There was no wasted movement, no visible nerves. It was as if he trained his entire life for this moment. The crowd's taunts, the champion's mockery, none of it seemed to reach him. He appeared almost tranquil, but his eyes told a different story. Behind the calm exterior was a razor-sharp focus, an unyielding determination that surprised a few onlookers who noticed the intensity in his gaze. They murmured among themselves, sensing something unusual about this quiet challenger. The champion, however, remained oblivious. He continued to mock and ridicule, determined to unnerve the human, to make him break before the fight even began. But the human's silence persisted, like a wall against the champion's words. His refusal to engage in the taunts, to acknowledge the crowd's laughter, left the champion frustrated. No matter how loud he jeered, the human stood firm, exuding a calm confidence that hinted at something the champion hadn't encountered before. The arena fell into an odd silence, a shift in atmosphere that was almost palpable. The crowd, once laughing and dismissive, now watched with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. The human had drawn their attention without a single word, without a single boast. He had become an enigma, a puzzle they couldn't quite understand. The whispers grew, spreading through the audience like a ripple. Who was this human? What did he have planned? Why didn't he react? Finally, the champion's smirk faltered ever so slightly, his bravado starting to wane. There was something about this opponent that he couldn't place, a sense of purpose that felt out of place in the arena's bloodthirsty chaos. But he shrugged it off, unwilling to let doubt take root. He was the champion, the strongest fighter in the galaxy, and he would show this human the harsh reality of the arena. As the moments ticked by, the human's stillness became a statement in itself. His silence filled the arena, pressing down on the champion's confidence, gnawing at the certainty he'd always felt. Here stood someone who refused to acknowledge fear, who didn't seem to recognize the champion's reputation or the crowd's mocking jeers. The champion's laughter faded, his voice silenced by the heavy calm radiating from his opponent. Now, it was no longer just a fight. It felt like a test, a question that hung in the air. Could the champion's brute strength truly conquer this unyielding resolve? For the first time, doubt flickered in the champion's mind, a feeling he'd never allowed himself to experience. He shook his head, banishing the thought. This was just another fight, another win. The human was insignificant, he reminded himself. Just another weak creature, an easy opponent. But even as he tried to convince himself, his eyes couldn't leave the human's unwavering gaze. There was something there, something that warned him, deep down, that this fight wouldn't be as simple as he'd imagined. The two opponents stood facing each other, and a tense quiet gripped the crowd. The champion sized up his opponent, sneering at the human's smaller frame and lack of weapons. He lunged first, his speed and strength shocking the audience as he aimed to end the fight quickly. His strikes were powerful, each blow calculated to break bones, to crush, to shatter. He expected the human to crumble under his force. But each time his fists flew, the human sidestepped, narrowly avoiding each devastating strike. The crowd gasped, astonished. The human's movements were quick, sharp, precise. He didn't match the champion's strength, but his every motion was controlled, efficient. He seemed to anticipate each attack just before it landed, adjusting his position with an eerie calmness. The champion's frustration began to show as he missed time and again, his attacks failing to connect. For the first time, he found himself not in control. His blows were meeting empty air, and the cheers from the crowd grew softer, filled now with disbelief. As the champion adjusted his stance, the human made his move, darting in with a speed that took the champion off guard. His fists landed with surprising accuracy, targeting precise points on the champion's body. Each hit was quick, almost surgical, intended not to injure outright but to disrupt. He struck at weak spots, areas the champion hadn't even realized could be exploited. Every strike caused the champion to stumble, to lose rhythm, disrupting his balance. The crowd watched, wide-eyed, as the human used minimal energy, focusing not on brute force but on precision and timing. The champion roared, now more than just frustrated. His confidence had been a shield, an unshakable certainty, but now it cracked. He tried to regain control, launching himself at the human with renewed fury. His movements grew faster, his strikes more aggressive. He was determined to end this humiliation, to crush this opponent who dared make him look foolish. But the human didn't falter, didn't panic. He remained calm, letting the champion's fury work against him. Every time the champion attacked, he overcommit, leaving himself open for a brief instant, a moment the human exploited again and again. His strikes were like quick jolts, aimed to destabilize rather than overpower. He stayed just close enough to evade each attack, yet close enough to counter in an instant. The champion, used to fights ending swiftly, found himself drained, his massive energy wasted on missed punches and blocked strikes. For every ounce of force he threw, the humans seemed to expend only a fraction in return. The audience began to shift, the initial confidence they'd had in their champion beginning to waver. The human's movements held a rhythm, a flow that the crowd hadn't expected. His approach to combat was unlike anything they'd seen. It was more like a dance than a fight, each step measured, each strike calculated to throw the champion off balance. With every misstep the champion made, the crowd's faith eroded, replaced by a growing awe for the human's strategy and skill. The human's focus was unwavering, his eyes locked on his opponent, reading his every move. He seemed to predict each attack, sidestepping and countering with almost mechanical precision. He wasn't fighting to overpower. He was fighting to outlast, to let the champion wear himself down. His hits landed with accuracy, not strength, each one a reminder to the champion that raw power alone wouldn't guarantee victory. He was proving that precision, patience, and skill could be just as powerful as brute force. The champion's frustration became palpable, his breathing heavier, his movements less controlled. Each missed punch, each failed attempt to overpower the human chipped away at his confidence. His body began to show signs of exhaustion, subtle yet undeniable. His powerful strikes lost their initial strength, his punches slower, his stance less secure. He had spent so much energy trying to dominate that he was left vulnerable. Then, with a final burst of anger, the champion swung wildly, hoping to land a hit by sheer force. The human ducked, his movements seamless, and countered with a quick succession of strikes aimed at the champion's most vulnerable spots. These were hits with purpose, strikes that targeted nerves and joints, causing the champion's body to falter, his massive form forced to kneel. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their once invincible champion now humbled before the calm, calculating human. The champion's fury grew, his pride bruised as he struggled to overpower his opponent. His frustration intensified with each failed attempt, his movements now a mix of anger and desperation. He lunged forward with everything he had, throwing caution aside, determined to prove his dominance through sheer force. Each strike came harder, faster, his power unrestrained, abandoning precision for pure aggression. His intent was clear. He wanted to crush, to destroy, to erase any doubt of his strength. But the human moved with unwavering composure, responding not with panic but with sharpened focus. He adapted with each shift in the champion's approach, adjusting his stance and timing to match the increasingly reckless strikes. The human watched carefully, calculating every move, observing the patterns in the champion's attacks, which had now become predictable in their anger-fueled simplicity. Where once the champion's strength had been controlled and fearsome, now it was a chaotic storm, lacking strategy, and leaving him exposed. Each time the champion overextended in his rage, the human found an opening. He struck precisely, targeting areas that affected the champion's balance and movement. With every calculated blow, the champion stumbled, his powerful frame beginning to show signs of wear. His breathing grew heavy, his movements slowed by the accumulating strain. The arena, once filled with chants for the champion, fell into a tense silence, the crowd witnessing a shift they hadn't anticipated. The human pressed forward, not to dominate, but to continue dismantling his opponent's confidence. His hits weren't designed to incapacitate. They were meant to disrupt, to undermine the champion's foundation. Each step back the champion took was a small victory, each missed punch a testament to the human's strategy. The champion, once the embodiment of strength, now struggled to keep up, forced into a defensive position he had never known. He looked around, as if searching for answers in the faces of the silent crowd, but found none. In his desperation, the champion attempted a final, all-or-nothing attack. He gathered his remaining strength and lunged forward, hoping to catch the human off guard. But the human remained steady, his focus unbroken. He sidestepped the charge effortlessly, turning the champion's momentum against him. With a series of precise movements, he landed successive strikes, each one targeting the champion's vulnerabilities. The hits weren't meant to end the fight but to exhaust, to further destabilize. The champion staggered, his once mighty frame weakened, his energy drained by his own reckless aggression. He swayed, struggling to maintain his balance, his confidence shattered by the relentless, calculated onslaught. His body, so accustomed to dominance, was now a heavy weight he could barely support. He looked at the human, his expression betraying a mix of disbelief and frustration, the realization dawning that brute force alone could not secure victory against a disciplined mind. The crowd, once filled with cheers and laughter, remained silent, their collective gaze fixed on the unfolding battle. They had expected a quick defeat for the human, a display of raw power that would reaffirm the champion's status. But now, faced with a challenger who had turned the fight into a methodical breakdown of the champion's strength, their awe grew. The human had transformed the arena, shifting the focus from spectacle to skill, from power to precision. The champion's final efforts were spent, his strength depleted, his attacks reduced to feeble swings that the human deflected with ease. His breathing was labored, his once intimidating presence diminished. The human stood before him, calm and unwavering, a quiet reminder of the power of control and patience. The champion's pride had been his downfall, his reliance on strength alone leaving him vulnerable to an opponent who understood the art of endurance. As he struggled to remain standing, the champion faced an undeniable truth. His might had limits, and those limits had been reached. He realized, perhaps too late, that the human had known this all along, had anticipated every move, and had countered not with strength, but with resilience. The battle was lost, not through brute force, but through the slow erosion of confidence, the dismantling of pride. The crowd's silence spoke volumes, their admiration shifting from the defeated champion to the human who had proven that strength without strategy was hollow. The champion, now barely able to lift his arms, could do nothing but acknowledge the human's victory. He had been bested, not by a superior force, but by an unyielding spirit, a calm resolve that had turned his own strength against him. In that moment, the champion understood that he had not faced a mere fighter, but a tactician, someone who had not sought glory through force, but through mastery. The human had exposed his weakness, his over-reliance on power, and had left him with a lesson he would never forget. The final blows had left the champion weakened, his movements slow and labored. The crowd watched, riveted, as the human stood before him, calm and steady, his breathing even and his stance unwavering. The arena's silence weighed heavily on the defeated champion, who had entered the fight certain of his invincibility. Now, he could barely stay upright, his pride stripped away along with his strength. The human didn't gloat, didn't raise his arms in victory. His expression remained unreadable, focused yet detached. There was no trace of arrogance, only a quiet recognition of the battle's end. He had not fought for applause or praise, nor did he crave the attention of the stunned audience. His victory lay not in the spectacle but in the disciplined control that had brought his opponent to his knees. The crowd seemed to sense this, their usual cheers replaced by an unspoken respect. For the champion, the realization was almost too much to bear. He'd relied on his power, on the adoration of the crowd, to define himself. But here he was, humbled by a fighter who had shown him that strength was only part of the equation. The human had demonstrated that skill, patience, and strategy were just as powerful, perhaps even more so. And in that moment, the champion felt the weight of his own hubris. He hadn't been beaten by a stronger force, he'd been outwitted, outlasted. The arena doors opened, but the human didn't leave immediately. He looked at the champion, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't pity or disdain, just a recognition of the battle's conclusion, a message that the fight had been one of resilience, not mere power. The champion, exhausted and drained, managed a nod, understanding now what he had missed. He had been bested not by brute force but by an opponent who had mastered the art of restraint, who had allowed him to wear himself down through his own unchecked aggression. As the human turned to leave, the crowd shifted, uncertain of how to react. This wasn't the usual celebration, the boisterous cheering for a decisive, crushing victory. Instead, they found themselves in awe, struck by the unexpected lesson they had just witnessed. They had come to see the champion, to revel in the raw power and spectacle he brought to every fight. But this quiet, composed human had shown them something else, an approach that valued control, that respected discipline over dominance. The human walked away, blending into the shadows without so much as a backward glance. He left behind a stunned audience, a fallen champion, and a memory that would linger in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the fight. He hadn't just defeated an opponent, he had left an impression, a reminder that even in a place built on brutality, mastery of oneself could triumph over sheer force. The arena's air was thick with a silence that felt almost sacred, a rare moment where violence had been overshadowed by restraint. The defeated champion remained, his mind racing with thoughts of the fight and the opponent he had so gravely underestimated. In his mind, he replayed the human's movements, the steady gaze, the patient stance, the effortless way he had absorbed every taunt, every blow. What had seemed like weakness was, in fact, something far stronger, a will that could not be shaken, a mind that remained sharp and focused even in the face of overwhelming power. The champion now understood that he had faced a different kind of strength, one that could endure far beyond his own physical limits. In the days that followed, stories of the human's victory spread across the galaxy. Beings from distant planets spoke of the quiet fighter who had bested the undefeated champion without a word, without a display of pride or triumph. The legend grew, the human's calm demeanor and unyielding resolve becoming symbols of a new kind of heroism, one that didn't rely on spectacle or force. His victory challenged the very foundation of the arena's culture, introducing the idea that true strength lay in knowing when to strike, in mastering the self as much as the opponent. For the champion, the experience left a lasting impact. He no longer saw himself as invincible, no longer relied solely on his strength. The human had taught him humility, had forced him to confront the limits of his own power. He spent hours reflecting on the fight, seeking to understand the quiet resilience that had overcome his own brute force. Slowly, he began to train with a different purpose, focusing not just on strength but on control, on discipline, qualities he had once mocked but now respected deeply. In time, the champion returned to the arena, transformed. No longer did he rely solely on his raw power, and the crowd sensed the change in him. He fought with a new intensity, a measured approach that reflected the lessons he had learned. His reputation evolved, no longer based on his domination but on his newfound respect for the art of combat, for the skill of restraint. He carried with him the memory of the human who had shown him the power of balance, of patience. The human, meanwhile, disappeared from the public eye, leaving no trace of his presence in the arena. His story, however, remained alive, passed down through countless retellings, a reminder of the fight that had changed the galaxy's understanding of strength. He had entered the arena as an unknown, a seemingly unimpressive challenger. But he left as a legend, his legacy etched into the very fabric of the arena and in the minds of all who had seen him. And so, the arena, once a place of sheer brutality, now carried a legacy of something deeper. It stood as a testament not only to power but to the resilience and control that could, when wielded with precision, stand against any force. The human's victory became more than just a story of one fighter's triumph. It became a symbol, a reminder that strength could be many things, and that true mastery was a path few could tread but all could respect.